The conference room fell silent as my boss crumpled up 6 months of my work and tossed it into the trash, like yesterday's lunch wrapper. "This is garbage, Olivia," she announced to the entire team. "Start over, and this time, try not to waste everyone's time." What she didn't know was that my phone had been buzzing for the past hour with calls from the biggest tech company in the country, and her public humiliation was about to become the best thing that ever happened to my career. But before I tell you how watching her company crumble became the sweetest revenge I never had to plan, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will show you how one moment of cruelty can destroy everything someone worked their whole life to build. Let me take you back to where this really began, because the best revenge stories always start long before anyone realizes they're in one. 8 months ago, I joined Data Tech Solutions as a junior software architect. The job seemed perfect, a growing startup that promised innovation, creativity, and the chance to work on cutting-edge projects that could change how businesses handle their data. What they didn't mention in the interview was that my direct supervisor, Patricia Williams, treated the development team like her personal kingdom where creativity went to die. Patricia was one of those managers who had climbed the corporate ladder by saying yes to everything above her and no to everything below her. She had been with the company for 3 years, long enough to feel entitled but not long enough to actually understand what made great software great. Her approach to management was simple: control every detail, trust no one, and make sure everyone knew she was in charge. From my first week, I could see that our team was stuck in the past. While other companies were building sleek, intuitive interfaces that users actually enjoyed, we were still creating software that looked like it belonged in the early 2000s. Our clients complained constantly about how difficult our systems were to use, but Patricia's response was always the same: if they can't figure it out, they need better training. But I saw something different. During my first month, I spent time actually talking to our clients, understanding their frustrations, watching how they struggled with our interfaces. Sarah from accounting at Blackwood Manufacturing spent 20 minutes every morning just trying to generate a simple report. Mike from logistics at Riverside Logistics had to call our support line twice a week because our navigation system made no sense. These weren't training problems. These were design problems. So I started working on something in my spare time: a complete redesign of our core interface that would solve the problems I was seeing. I used modern design principles, intuitive navigation, and actually tested it with real users to make sure it worked the way people expected. I spent evenings and weekends perfecting every detail, creating something that could transform how our clients experienced our software. The results were incredible. When I quietly tested the new interface with a few friendly clients, their feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Sarah cut her morning report time from 20 minutes to 3. Mike stopped calling support entirely. They said it felt like stepping into the future after years of being stuck in the past. But Patricia had no interest in innovation that didn't come from her. When I mentioned during our team meetings that I was working on interface improvements, she would shut down the conversation immediately. "We have established procedures," she would say. "Random experimental projects are not part of your job description." She assigned me to work on maintenance tasks instead, fixing small bugs, updating documentation, handling routine support tickets. Important work, but not the kind of thing that would showcase what I was really capable of building. Meanwhile, my interface redesign kept growing, becoming more sophisticated and more powerful with each iteration. I wasn't trying to go around Patricia or undermine her authority. I genuinely believed that when she saw what the new interface could do, she would recognize its value. I thought she would want to support a project that could help our clients and potentially bring in new business. I was completely wrong about how she would react. The breaking point came during our quarterly planning meeting. Our CEO, Robert Grant, was reviewing client feedback and expressing concern about the recurring complaints regarding usability issues. "We need to start thinking about how to modernize our approach," he said. "Our competitors are offering much more user-friendly solutions." This seemed like the perfect opportunity to present my work. I had been refining the interface for months, gathering user feedback, documenting improvements, creating a comprehensive proposal that showed exactly how it could solve our client satisfaction problems. After the meeting ended, I approached Patricia with a folder containing screenshots, user testimonials, and detailed analysis of how the new interface could address every major complaint we'd been receiving. "I've been working on something that could help with the usability issues Robert mentioned," I said, placing the folder on her desk. "It's a complete interface redesign that's already been tested with actual users. The feedback has been amazing." Patricia flipped through the pages with the expression of someone reviewing a particularly annoying piece of junk mail. "Olivia, this is exactly the kind of unfocused work I've been trying to prevent. You were hired to maintain existing systems, not reinvent them based on your personal opinions about design." She closed the folder without really looking at the user testimonials or data analysis. "I want you to stop working on this immediately and focus on your assigned responsibilities." But I couldn't let it go. The interface wasn't just better, it was dramatically better. It solved real problems for real people. I had testimonials from clients saying it was the easiest software they had ever used. I had data showing significant improvements in task completion times and user satisfaction. So I did something that probably wasn't smart, but felt necessary. I scheduled a brief presentation for the next team meeting to demonstrate what the interface could do. Just 15 minutes to show the actual improvements, let the team see the user feedback, and discuss whether it might be worth pursuing. Patricia found out about the scheduled presentation 2 hours before the meeting. She called me into her office, her face tight with controlled anger. "I specifically told you to stop working on this project," she said. "And instead of listening, you decided to schedule a presentation behind my back?" "I thought if you could see the actual results," I started. "I don't care about results," she interrupted. "I care about following directions and respecting authority. You've shown me that you can't do either." She canceled my presentation and informed the team that there would be no discussion of unauthorized projects during company meetings. But the damage was already done. People had heard that I was working on something interesting, and they started asking questions about what I had built. Word got around. Other developers wanted to see the interface. A few clients mentioned hearing about potential improvements and asked when they might be available. Even Robert Grant asked Patricia about the project he had heard people discussing. Patricia's response was to double down on control. She implemented new policies requiring approval for any work that wasn't specifically assigned. She scheduled daily check-ins to monitor exactly what everyone was working on. She made it clear that innovation was her responsibility, not something individual team members should pursue. But the most devastating blow came 6 weeks later, during what she called a project review meeting. Patricia had discovered that I was still refining the interface during my lunch breaks and after work hours. Even though I wasn't using company time or resources, she considered it a violation of her authority and a distraction from my assigned duties. She called the entire development team into the main conference room, 12 people who would witness what happened next. She had printed out screenshots of my interface and spread them across the conference table like evidence in a criminal trial. "I want everyone to see what happens when team members ignore direct instructions and waste time on unauthorized projects," she announced, standing behind the conference table with my printed screenshots in front of her. She picked up the first page, a screenshot showing the new dashboard that users had described as intuitive and finally makes sense. She held it up for everyone to see, then slowly tore it in half. "This is garbage," she said, dropping the pieces into the trash can beside the table. She picked up the next page, user testimonials praising the improved navigation system. Tore it in half. Garbage. Into the trash. Page after page of my work, of user feedback, of data showing dramatic improvements in usability and client satisfaction. All of it torn up and thrown away while my colleagues watched in stunned silence. "Olivia," she said, turning to face me directly. "This is what happens when you waste 6 months on projects nobody asked for. You've created nothing but useless garbage that solves problems that don't exist." The humiliation was complete. 6 months of evening and weekend work, dismissed as garbage in front of my entire team. User testimonials calling it the best software they'd ever used, literally thrown in the trash. Data showing measurable improvements in client satisfaction, treated like worthless scrap paper. I want you to start over, Patricia continued. Focus on your actual job responsibilities. And maybe this time you'll understand that innovation comes from following proper procedures, not from freelance projects that nobody requested. I sat there feeling heat spread across my face as 12 people avoided making eye contact. Some of them had seen my interface. They knew it was good work. But nobody was going to challenge Patricia's authority, especially not after watching her publicly destroy months of effort. But while Patricia was making her point about following proper procedures, she had no idea that my phone had been buzzing constantly for the past hour with calls from a number I recognized but hadn't expected to hear from. Sage Tech Industries, the biggest software company in our sector. The company that every developer in our field dreamed of working for. I stepped out of the conference room feeling devastated and checked my voicemail. The message was from David Park, a senior director at Sage Tech who I had met briefly at an industry conference months earlier. Olivia, this is David Park from Sage Tech Industries. We've been hearing some very interesting things about interface work you've been doing at Data Tech Solutions. Several of our clients have mentioned seeing demonstrations of what they described as revolutionary usability improvements. We'd love to discuss a potential opportunity with you. Please call me back as soon as possible. I listened to the message twice, trying to process what was happening. While Patricia was destroying my work and calling it garbage, the biggest company in our industry was reaching out because they had heard about exactly the same project. I called David back immediately. Olivia, thanks for calling back so quickly, he said. I'll get straight to the point. We've been tracking some of the client feedback about interface innovations at Data Tech Solutions, and we understand you're the architect behind those improvements. He explained that Sage Tech had been struggling with similar usability challenges across their product line. They had tried multiple design firms and internal teams, but nothing had achieved the kind of user satisfaction improvements they were hearing about from Data Tech clients. We'd like to offer you a position as Senior Interface Architect with full autonomy over user experience design across our entire platform, he said. The compensation package starts at $180,000 annually, plus equity participation, and a $50,000 signing bonus. But more importantly, you'd be working with a team that values exactly the kind of innovation you've been developing. $180,000. More than double my current salary. At a company that built software used by millions of people worldwide. With complete creative control over the kind of work that Patricia had just called garbage. There's one more thing, David continued. We know you can't bring proprietary code from your current position, but we also know that good design principles and user experience insights are skills you carry with you. If you join us, you'd be building something completely new, but based on the same philosophy that's been generating such positive client feedback. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. By the end, I had a formal offer letter being sent to my personal email and a start date 3 weeks away. Sage Tech wasn't just offering me a job. They were offering me the chance to build the future of software interfaces with unlimited resources and a team that understood innovation. When I walked back into the Data Tech office, Patricia was still in the conference room, lecturing my former teammates about proper project management procedures while my torn-up work sat in the trash can. I knocked on the conference room door and waited for her to acknowledge me. "What is it, Olivia?" she asked, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "I wanted to let you know that I'm resigning from Data Tech Solutions effective immediately," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "I'll be joining Sage Tech Industries as their Senior Interface Architect." The conference room went completely silent. Patricia's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to something that looked like panic. "You can't just quit in the middle of a team meeting," she stammered. "There are procedures, notice requirements, transition protocols." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the offer letter that had just arrived. My employment contract allows for immediate resignation in cases where professional development has been deliberately obstructed. Having 6 months of work destroyed in front of colleagues qualifies. Robert Grant, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before making any hasty decisions. But I was done with private discussions and diplomatic solutions. Patricia had chosen to humiliate me publicly, so she could experience the consequences just as publicly. There's nothing to discuss, I said, gathering my personal items from the conference table. My decision is final. I'll submit formal resignation paperwork within the hour. As I walked toward the conference room exit, I could feel 12 pairs of eyes following my movement. Some of my colleagues looked shocked, others looked impressed, and a few looked like they were reconsidering their own career options. Patricia called after me, her voice higher than usual. "You're making a huge mistake. Sage Tech is a corporate machine with no room for personal creativity. You're throwing away job security for some fantasy about design innovation being more important than following established procedures." I paused at the doorway and turned back to face her. We'll see which approach proves more valuable. Within 24 hours, I had cleaned out my desk, completed exit interviews, and started my new position at Sage Tech Industries. Their office was 3 times larger than Datatech's, filled with the latest technology and teams of developers working on projects that would be used by millions of people worldwide. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that great software comes from listening to users and solving real problems, not from following rigid procedures that ignore what people actually need. But the real validation of my decision came in the weeks that followed, as I watched the natural consequences of Patricia's actions unfold with devastating precision. I hadn't contacted any Datatech clients. I hadn't made recruitment calls or sent transition messages. I simply updated my professional profiles to reflect my new position and continued being the same person who had spent months solving real usability problems. The first indication that something was changing came during my second week at Sage Tech. David Park mentioned that he had received a call from Blackwood Manufacturing asking about potential alternatives to their current software solutions. They specifically mentioned that they had been working with someone who really understood their workflow challenges, he said. Someone who had created interface improvements that made their daily tasks dramatically easier. When they heard that person had joined Sage Tech, they wanted to explore whether we could provide similar solutions. Blackwood Manufacturing. Sarah from accounting, who had gone from 20-minute report generation to 3 minutes using my interface improvements. She was reaching out because she wanted to continue working with someone who had actually solved her problems. The second call came 3 days later. Riverside Logistics, Mike from Logistics, the client who had stopped calling support entirely after testing my improved navigation system. They were interested in discussing software solutions with a company that employed people who understood real-world usability challenges. Week after week, the pattern continued. Clients who had experienced the interface improvements I had developed were naturally interested in working with a company that now employed the person who had created those solutions. I wasn't actively recruiting them. I wasn't making sales calls or sending promotional materials. I was simply being available when they called, applying the same problem-solving approach that had improved their experience in the first place, and working for a company that had the resources to build exactly what they needed. Meanwhile, back at Datatech Solutions, Patricia was starting to realize what she had actually destroyed when she tore up my interface work in front of the entire team. I heard about her growing panic through mutual connections in the professional community. Apparently, she had tried to reach out to major clients for routine check-ins, only to discover that many of them were exploring other software options. When she called Blackwood Manufacturing to discuss contract renewal, they politely informed her that they were evaluating alternatives and would not be extending their current agreement. When she contacted Riverside Logistics about upcoming project needs, they explained that they had found a software partner who better understood their operational requirements. One by one, the clients who had experienced my interface improvements were making the choice to work with a company that could deliver the kind of user-focused solutions they had come to expect. Patricia had believed that client loyalty was tied to Datatech's brand reputation and established relationships. She was discovering that client loyalty was actually tied to getting software that made their work easier, not to following proper procedures that ignored their actual needs. The third week after my departure, I received a call that made everything clear about how devastating Patricia's decision had become. Sarah from Blackwood Manufacturing wanted to share some information that she thought I should know. Patricia called me yesterday, she said, asking if there were any service issues that might explain why we were considering other software options. When I told her we were following you to Sage Tech because your interface improvements had transformed how our team works, she actually argued with me about it. Sarah laughed, but not in a way that suggested she found it amusing. She told me that established procedures were more important than interface improvements and that I was making an emotional decision instead of a business decision. She said we should prioritize vendor relationships over software functionality. Can you believe that? She was lecturing me about how I should choose my own business software. That phone call revealed everything about why Patricia's approach was failing so spectacularly. Even when faced with evidence that interface improvements were driving client decisions, she couldn't adjust her philosophy. She was still trying to convince people that following procedures mattered more than solving problems. By the end of my first month at Sage Tech, 8 former Datatech clients had either switched to our platform or initiated conversations about potential transitions. These weren't small accounts. They represented over 40% of Datatech's annual revenue. I wasn't actively recruiting them. I was simply being available when they called, applying the same user-focused approach that had created the interface improvements in the first place, and working for a company that had the resources to build solutions that actually addressed their needs. Sage Tech was exceeding their growth projections by 300%, while Datatech Solutions was experiencing the worst client retention crisis in company history. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the professional recognition, though both were incredible. The most satisfying part was knowing that Patricia had created this entire situation herself through her stubborn refusal to value work that solved real problems. She could have supported my interface development. She could have learned from the client feedback and user testimonials. She could have recognized that innovation comes from understanding user needs, not from following rigid procedures that ignore what people actually experience. Instead, she had chosen to publicly humiliate me and destroy work that represented months of problem-solving and user research, apparently believing that her authority was more important than actual evidence of what worked. 2 months after my departure, I heard through professional networks that Robert Grant had called an emergency board meeting to address the client retention crisis. Datatech Solutions was facing the possibility of layoffs, reduced operations, and potentially being acquired by a larger company to survive their revenue loss. Patricia, who had been so confident about her procedural approach and proper project management, was now scrambling to explain how the company had lost nearly half of its major clients within 8 weeks. According to sources who were still working there, she had initially tried to blame my departure for the client defections, arguing that I had somehow violated professional ethics or stolen proprietary information to recruit accounts. But the timeline didn't support her accusations. Clients weren't leaving immediately after I resigned. They were leaving after experiencing Datatech's return to the old interface system and discovering that they preferred working with people who could deliver the improvements they had come to expect. The board investigation revealed exactly what I could have told them months earlier. Clients choose software partners based on functionality, usability, and problem-solving capability, not on how strictly companies follow internal procedures or how efficiently they process support tickets. Patricia had spent months dismissing interface improvements as unauthorized projects, and now she was facing the consequences of that philosophy in the form of client defections that threatened the entire company's survival. 3 months after my departure, I received the call that made this revenge story complete. Robert Grant contacted me personally to discuss what he called a potential partnership opportunity. He wanted to know if Sage Tech would be interested in acquiring Datateka's remaining client accounts and possibly hiring some of their staff during what he described as a strategic restructuring process. The company that had considered my interface work garbage was now hoping to sell their remaining assets to the firm that had been built on exactly the principles Patricia had rejected. During our conversation, Robert mentioned that they were also re-evaluating leadership approaches in their development department. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Patricia's position was no longer secured. I have to ask, he said toward the end of our call, what would it take to bring you back to Datatech as head of software development? We're prepared to offer significant compensation increases and complete autonomy over interface design strategies. The irony was incredible. 3 months after watching my work get torn up in front of my colleagues, I was being recruited back to implement exactly the same approach at a much higher salary with complete authority over the department that had rejected my methods. But I had no interest in returning to work for people who had only learned to value innovation after losing millions of dollars in revenue. I appreciate the offer, I told him, but I'm very happy with my current position. Sage Tech understood the value of user-focused design from day one, rather than having to learn it through crisis. 6 months after leaving Datatech Solutions, I was promoted to Director of User Experience at Sage Tech with equity participation and responsibility for expanding our interface philosophy across multiple product lines. The clients who had followed me from Datatech became the foundation for our most successful quarter in company history. Meanwhile, Datatech Solutions underwent the strategic restructuring that Robert had euphemistically described. They laid off 40% of their staff, sold their main office space, and ultimately merged with a competitor who valued procedural efficiency over user experience innovation. Patricia was not retained during the merger. I learned about her departure through LinkedIn updates and professional network conversations. According to former colleagues, she had spent her final months at Datatech trying to rebuild client relationships using the same procedure-focused approach that had caused the crisis in the first place. She apparently never understood that the problem wasn't her technical knowledge or project management skills. The problem was her fundamental belief that following internal procedures was more important than solving client problems. The last update I heard about her situation came from a mutual professional contact who mentioned that she was having difficulty finding comparable positions because her most recent role had ended during a major client retention crisis. Potential employers were understandably concerned about hiring someone whose management approach had contributed to such significant revenue loss, especially in leadership roles where innovation was considered essential. I felt no pleasure in hearing about her career difficulties. My satisfaction came from knowing that the principles she had mocked and rejected were now recognized throughout our industry as essential for sustainable business success. Every software company was investing in user experience research. Every development program emphasized the importance of solving real problems rather than following rigid procedures. Every successful tech firm prioritized exactly the approach that Patricia had considered unauthorized garbage. She had been wrong about what clients valued, wrong about what drove business success, and wrong about the importance of innovation in software development. And her wrongness had been revealed not through elaborate schemes or calculated attacks, but simply through allowing natural consequences to unfold after she chose to publicly destroy work that represented the foundation of client satisfaction. The most elegant revenge is always the kind where your enemy defeats themselves through their own actions, and you simply have to step aside and let their poor decisions create the destruction they deserve. Today, 1 year after watching my interface work get torn up in front of 12 colleagues, I'm running the user experience division for one of the fastest-growing tech companies in our industry. Our success is built entirely on the principle that Patricia rejected, that great software comes from understanding user needs and solving real problems, not from following procedures that ignore what people actually experience. Every day, I get to work with clients who appreciate having their workflow challenges understood, their usability feedback incorporated, and their business problems addressed with genuine technical innovation. And every day I'm reminded that the best revenge against people who undervalue your contributions is simply proving them wrong through your continued success elsewhere. Patricia thought she was destroying unauthorized project work when she tore up my interface designs. What she actually destroyed was the only thing preventing her professional world from collapsing around her. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their own terrible decisions while you build something better somewhere else. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had someone destroy work that you knew was valuable, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed hearing about how tearing up my designs became the beginning of Patricia's professional downfall, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about workplace revenge that writes itself when you simply let incompetent managers face the consequences of their own poor judgment.